Jesus Christ claimed to be God in the flesh. And one of the pieces of evidence that he used to bolster that claim was the resurrection. He claimed that he was going to die, and then after he died, the Bible writers claimed that he rose from the grave. The fact of the matter is Christianity stands or falls on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Did Jesus really rise from the grave? Is there evidence that proves that to be a historical reality? Yes, there is. I'm going to give you 6 facts that lead to the inevitable conclusion that Jesus Christ rose from the grave. Fact number 1, Jesus Christ lived. That seems very simple. It seems like maybe you shouldn't even put that in a list of facts that validate the resurrection, but many people argue against the very historical life of Jesus. They say that Jesus wasn't a historical person, that he was a myth and was just made up and a story that didn't find a historical basis. But that's not true. We have several hostile witnesses that prove Jesus lived. We have friendly testimony from the Bible writers that prove Jesus lived. It is a fact that Jesus Christ lived. Fact number 2, Jesus Christ died. Once you show that Jesus was a historical person, then coming to the conclusion that Jesus Christ died, even the skeptic has to agree, would be true. Because if Jesus lived, then he certainly died. And as you look at the writings that document the life of Jesus, you see that everybody in the discussion, the Jewish community, the early Christians, they all admit that Jesus did die. In fact, early Jewish writings that are not friendly to Jesus at all document that Jesus was killed. And so you've got the fact that Jesus lived. You've got the fact that Jesus died. Fact number 3, the tomb of Jesus was empty. So Jesus lived, Jesus died, and he was buried, but that tomb, what happened there? Is it a fact of history that that tomb was empty? The Bible writers say that the tomb was empty, but that's not the only testimony to the empty tomb. In fact, there was a Jewish writing going around early after the resurrection of Jesus that was explaining the empty tomb. And that writing said that a godless and lawless heresy had sprung up from Jesus, a Galilean, whom we crucified, this Jewish writing said, but his disciples stole him by night from the tomb where he was laid when unfastened from the cross, and now deceive men by asserting that he's risen from the dead and ascended to heaven. Now, notice what that writing is doing. They're forced to admit the tomb is empty. That's what Peter was doing on the day of Pentecost when he stood in Jerusalem and he talked about the resurrected Christ. And basically, he was challenging his listeners to go and look at the empty tomb. And what you will find is the tomb, and it's empty. Jesus lived, Jesus died, and the tomb where Jesus was buried was empty. Fact number 4. The apostles preached that Jesus rose physically from the dead. Now, on the day of Pentecost, when Peter was preaching that first recorded gospel sermon in about AD 33, he insisted to that multitude of Jews that God had raised Jesus up from the grave, and God had loosed him from the pangs of death. He went so far as to quote an Old Testament psalm that talked about how God would not allow His Holy One to see corruption. Peter stated that Jesus Christ rose. And not only that Jesus Christ rose, but that it was a physical resurrection. He stated specifically that His flesh would not see corruption. Some people have said, well, the apostles didn't believe in a physical resurrection. They might have thought they had seen Jesus' ghost or His spirit or something along those lines, but they didn't really teach that it was physical. Oh, on the contrary, they certainly did teach that it was physical. In fact, that was the cornerstone of the preaching and teaching of the apostles. It was the singular criterion that was used to add a new apostle that person had to have been with the other apostles and witnessed the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. That was the primary criterion to become an apostle of the one that took Judas's place. So yes, the apostles preached that Jesus physically rose from the grave. Fact number 5, the apostles suffered and died because of their teachings on the resurrection. You can't get around that fact. The apostles went everywhere preaching the resurrection, and when they did, they ran into opposition on every level with the Jewish community, with the Roman leadership, and not only was it just opposition, but the apostles suffered, they were tortured, and they died for preaching on the resurrection. In fact, all they would have had to do to keep that persecution from occurring was to have said something along the lines of, Jesus didn't really come back from the grave. We saw his spirit, or it was his personality that was still with us. But no, they preached a physical resurrection. And they died for preaching that physical resurrection of Christ. As one Bible scholar stated, he said, while men may die out of religious deception, they do not willingly go to their deaths knowing they are perpetrating a hoax. What he simply meant by that was the apostles saw Jesus' resurrected body. They preached Jesus' resurrection in the flesh, and they died for that preaching. Do you know why? Because they understood they would get a resurrected body like their Lord had received. In fact, number 6, the resurrection is recorded in the Bible, and the Bible is the most historically accurate book in history. While some people don't want to recognize this fact, it is, make no mistake, a fact. Biblical scholar Wayne Jackson noted, in the book of Acts, Luke mentions 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 Mediterranean islands. He also mentions 95 persons, 62 of which are not named elsewhere in the New Testament, and his references, where checkable, are always correct. This is truly remarkable in view of the fact that the political and territorial situation of his day was in a state of almost constant change. You see, the Bible has been scrutinized and criticized more than any other book in the world, and yet it still stands as the most historically accurate book in the world. And that historically accurate book, the Bible, those 27 books of the New Testament, they testify to the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. So, based on the historical grounds, the resurrection of Jesus Christ has as much or more evidence to validate its credibility than any other event in human history. The primary argument against the resurrection, by those who don't believe it, is that during the normal course of events, dead people don't rise from the grave, which is exactly the very point being made by the apostles. When all the evidence is weighed and it's revealed that the apostles never buckled under torture, the New Testament never crumbles under scrutiny, and the secular historical witnesses refuse to be drowned in a sea of criticism, then it's evident that the resurrection of Jesus Christ demands its rightful place in the annals of human history as the most important event this world has ever seen. To quote the immortal words of the Holy Spirit as spoken through the Apostle Paul to King Agrippa in the great long ago, why is it judged incredible with you if God does raise the dead?